Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Endless Spiral podcast. I am, as always, your host, Keith Russell. This is the mental health show where I speak to anyone and everyone with a story to tell, as long as getting tips and advice from experts in their chosen field. So in today's episode, I'm delighted to say we are joined by broadcaster Clare McKenna. Clare is the host of Live and Kicking on Newstalk, which is a health show which they kind of cover health in a wide variety of topics. And Clare also has her own podcast called Changemakers, and she's not feeling very well today, so we'll go easy on Clare. Thanks, Clare, for coming on. How are you?
I'm good. COVID has got me. I've got the positive antigen, so it is in the house. And I am going to admit I was starting to get smug because 2 years in, I'd never had it before. And I was starting to think, well, I mean, I'm a health and wellness presenter. It goes without saying that I'm going to have a cast iron immune system, but no, there was nothing to be smug about. I could have jinxed myself, but yeah, it feels like a head cold. So no, I'm happy to talk to you and have a reason to get rest.
Well, I've actually got a shirt on with pajama bottoms on, so I only do the waist up anyway. So
that's how we all live our lives now, because it's all Zoom and it's all online. So yeah, the world is in pajamas on the bottom.
Exactly. I usually start off the podcast kind of asking people how they were during kind of lockdown now, but I read a quote from you, and I'll read it out to you now. It's only short. So I could never truly identify with how they felt. I'm presuming you're talking about the guests on your show until COVID kind of came. So I suppose what I was going to ask is, like, obviously COVID just must have made you feel very, very anxious, was it?
Yeah. And obviously through my time on Ireland AM and on Newstalk, anxiety has come up time and time again. And I'd be a big fan of Caroline Foran, and I listen to her podcast a lot. Yeah. And I'm hearing people talk about this crippling anxiety that affects their everyday life. And it's not that I didn't empathize with them or, believe them. It's just that I couldn't identify with it. And then it feels so long ago now, but that time when Leah Varadkar kind of stopped everything and everyone was to stay in their home, and even that stay home in the corner of every TV program. And I remember getting a text from a friend of mine. Her husband is a surgeon, and she said, Richard thinks we're all going to lose someone close to us. And we'd seen what was happening in Italy, and I just didn't know whether people were just going to start dropping dead in the street. Were my parents going to die? What was going to happen? And it was that real unknown and that catastrophizing in my head, that tightness across my chest, and really having to dig deep to kind of calm myself down and bring myself back. And I remember thinking to myself, is this how people with anxiety feel on a daily basis? Is this what it's like in the pit of your stomach and across your chest? And yeah, I suppose it gave me a greater understanding.
Yeah, I've lived with anxiety for like a long time, so I can completely understand the feelings, that you're describing. But it's funny because I didn't feel anxious about, the lockdown at all, because I kind of discovered I was, a borderline recluse. So, and I've spoken to a lot of people with anxiety, and most of them said the same thing. It was nearly a comfort for them that they didn't have to go out anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Because, and I have heard that. And I've heard a lot of people say, those that would be anxious day to day and catastrophize, and it's not to be insensitive about it, but about, things that might happen. It was almost as if when something really big happened, a lot of them were like, see, I told you, mad stuff is out there, and they kind of felt a little bit validated in some way. That's a friend of mine I work with, and her husband would suffer a lot with social anxiety. So yes, the lockdown did kind of take away some of the complications of life, but also the fact that a catastrophe had arrived was almost comforting in many ways.
Yeah, exactly.
But the lockdown for me and my family, I was actually quite lucky. I mean, whatever way the weather went, it was glorious, wasn't it? Right at the start. I have 2 young kids. 2019 was probably my busiest work year ever. It was great. I was really enjoying it. And a lot of people were saying, once we kind of had everything taken away, God, didn't you really realize what you had? But I used to drive along in my car on a regular basis saying, God, I really love my life. God, I'm so lucky. Great friends, great family. You know, I love my job. So I was really loving life when it was stopped, but it was also very busy and it was hard to juggle everything. So to just focus on the kids, on the house, on getting out for a walk, on cooking a nice meal. My mum and dad only lived a 5-10 minute drive from my house. And my dad had dementia. So in the lockdown, he really went downhill because he wasn't getting any social interaction. So everything that was keeping his brain going started to crash down, and my mum was really suffering. So that was a really tough part, because like everyone, we were just dropping shopping at the door and saying, okay, bye, you know, afraid that we were going to kill them by breathing on them closer than 2 meters. And we all really had to pull together as a family. And I think if I had been working at the pace I was in 2019, that would have been very difficult for me to manage. Whereas for the year of 2020, we really came together as a family, and we did like a carers course with the Alzheimer's Society. We had carers coming in and out of the house. I was able to spend time with my dad. I was able to sit and have family meetings and really take it on board. And he died then in November of 2020. So I will always have that time, and I will actually always be quite grateful for the world slowing down. I mean, look, we used to come with masks on, gloves on, be terrified. And when you think about it now, with the way we move around with COVID, back then, if you went to the supermarket with a mask on, with, you know, your hand sanitizer, got back into the car, I was washing down shopping and still wondering, was I going to bring COVID in and kill my dad? So there was all that stress with it, but ultimately it was a very simple time. And there's parts of it, to be honest with you, I miss, not the pandemic COVID part, but the simple family time.
Yeah, that's funny because I have another quote that I read from you, and it's the reason why I wrote down, because I thought it was quite good. So, juggling work with 2 kids and little childcare left me feeling frazzled, and like I was constantly chasing my tail. So to be working from home, albeit at reduced hours, and have the time to focus on my family and my health was actually a welcome change. It's just exactly what you just said. Because I thought the reason why I copied and pasted that quote down, because I just thought it was so many people can relate to that, you know, like especially when people were trying to homeschool as well. You just felt like you were, as you said, frazzled and chasing your tail. And I think that probably got on top of a lot of people, and they probably didn't realize it because they were just kind of going and going and going. And it's only when it kind of slows down afterwards you kind of realize that you're probably burnt out a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I call it spinning plates, because it's more than juggling. You're literally looking at all these plates, then you look at one and it's slowing down, and you're like, I find it even now, I can't have everything flowing at the same time. And I've actually really made peace with that. I can't have a perfect marriage where we're getting on like a house on fire, where we're making time for ourselves away from the kids. I can't be the perfect mom who rolls around on the floor and makes nutritious meals left, right and center, and handles discipline to the best of my ability every single time. I can't work as much as I'd like to and bring about as many creative projects as I'd like at any one time. I just do the best I can with everything I have. Likewise, you know, friendships. I've really noticed at this stage in my life, your friendships have to take a bit of a back seat. I've still got great friends that I really do make a lot of time with, but that lovely time in your 20s where it's your friends are your family, and you're just going here and there and the cinema, and you're deciding on a whim that you'll go, you know, for dinner somewhere, like all that sort of has to go, and it's very planned and structured. So I've made peace with that, because I think we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be everything: the perfect partner, the perfect parent, perfect at work, perfect at the gym, perfect bodies, perfect minds. And it's actually just not realistic. You just have to be doing your best and try and find contentment where you can.
Exactly what it is. I have a WhatsApp group with some, you know, my friends that I've known since we were small, and that's it. Like, you get a couple of messages here and there, and that's all you can really do, you know. I mean, I don't know if you're too familiar with my story, but I mean, because I was silent for so long about stuff, I kind of drifted away from like a lot of people. But then when I started to share my story and open up kind of for the last year anyway, I've opened up the kind of the lines of communication with with so many people. So I'm actually probably speaking to more people now than I did for a long, long time. Although I might not see them because I said I'm a borderline recluse at this stage. But like the lockdown has actually been quite positive for me, you know, for that sense where, you know, I've dealt with so many, you know, the inner critic I had, with so many issues I had, you know, with mental health. Me sharing my story is actually completely like COVID has been really positive for me, which is kind of strange, I suppose. But
Yeah, and for a lot of people, I think we all had a reassessment of all areas of our life and thought it was like going back to ground zero in a way, wasn't it? It was a blank canvas. Everything got stripped back. So I know some people really struggled, like you said, they'd homeschool, they were working from home. See, I'm self-employed and so is my husband. So we were able to just step back. I know there were people who had laptops on the end of their bed and really small kids. Mine were 7 and 9 or maybe 6 and 8 when it kicked off. So they were dressing themselves, they were brushing their teeth. Like, I don't know what it was like with toddlers, babies, you know, Zooms with management teams. Like, I didn't have any of that. So I know there were some people who just white knuckled through the whole thing. But for others, there was that time to really reassess. And what I said about identifying with anxiety, I also really got to put into practice so many of the things that I would have professed over time, like getting out for a walk or like to move your body in some way, leaning on nature. You know, I read about it, I spoke about it, but I never really felt it. Like, I'm the cliche that started getting into the sea because I'm from Howth, so I'm beside the sea. My friends were meeting. I had watched them do it and thought, oh, no. I mean, there was times I went to Spain and didn't get in because I thought it would be too cold. So I certainly wasn't planning on getting in here, but I did get that. I did get that buzz from it, and I did get that community feel. I did get that lost in the moment feeling. So there was that opportunity as well to go for that walk in the afternoon and come back and be like, okay, I feel a bit better, to take a meditation from YouTube or whatever, because I thought so many of the people that I follow on social media really put themselves out there online. So there were people like Jerry Hussey used to do a weekly meditation on a Sunday. I used to join in with that, or I'd keep it recorded, or, you know, sit and do it in a moment of madness. I'd go up the stairs, light the candle, sit and breathe. So I really felt those tools come to the fore. So that was a really good lesson as well.
So were they all part of your Operation Peak Health, which I wanted to talk to you about as well? Because that was just mind blowing when I read that. I didn't realize that you'd actually did that. Was that all part of that? Oh, I suppose like it was supposed to be better probably explain to people what exactly that, you know, that actually was.
Well, it started with, and it's so funny how big moments in your life can come from really small situations. So we had a chef type person booked in to come in to Newstalk for an interview. And the way it goes with Newstalk, I'm one of the weekend shows, and then obviously there's the Monday to Friday shows. So you kind of, in radio, you kind of separate it a little bit. But if somebody's on during the week, they can't be on at the weekend. And likewise, you just need to leave it a couple of weeks. That's just one of the sort of rules, as it were. And there'd been a miscommunication, and that person was sitting on the couch to go on one of the weekday shows when they were due to come on my show on Sunday. So myself and the producer were in a bit of a tiz, thinking, you know, what were we going to do to replace this person? And she said, listen, I know I've let you down. I'm sorry about that. And look, we weren't demonizing her. These things happen. It wasn't really a big deal in that way. We just were wondering who we were going to have in her place. And she said, there's a guy who's just been published in the same publishing house as me. His name is Daniel Davey. He's a performance nutritionist. He works with Leinster Rugby and the GAA football teams. I think, you know, he could be good. And I was like, yeah, okay, like he fits the bill, you know, that would work. It's sport, it's nutrition. Yeah, that's great. And when he came in, it was the way he spoke about nutrition. There was something in it that just fired off light bulbs in my head. And he was talking about food and your relationship with food. And he's from Sligo. He grew up on a farm. He's talking about your relationship from the land to now, to enjoying cooking, to not being afraid of food. And he wasn't just talking about it as fuel necessarily. He was talking about that enjoyment and that love. But he was talking about the way we eat and the way we feel and how food can make us feel. And that was not really something that I had necessarily gone in with, apart from the guilt feelings or the joy a brownie would give me at the end of dessert. I wasn't really thinking about our energy levels, our ability to work out, our motivation, our mood. And he was talking about a DEXA scanner that can look at your lean muscle mass. And he said he felt it should be in the corner of every GP surgery, because it's certainly something we should keep an eye on, not from an aesthetic point of view, but from health longevity point of view, and some of the lifestyle issues that can crop up, like diabetes and other chronic illnesses. So I got an idea in my head, but I am going to be really honest with you. At the start of this, I was still very keen on the aesthetic. So I wanted to say all of this. I wanted to say I'm on this holistic health journey. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But at the end of it, I really wanted photographs of me ripped, looking amazing, and being like, look what I did. And, the hands up, that's what I wanted to do. And it was just on that journey that everything changed, that I really opened my eyes to the fact that there is another way and there is another conversation that we all need to be having. And it's been so oversimplistic in eat less, move more. And it wasn't taking into account a whole host of things. So I worked with Daniel Davey. I also worked with another guest. Like, I feel so lucky on Alive and Kicking. Everybody that sits in front of me, I'm like a sponge. I'm like hanging on their every word.
I do that too.
I get introduced to so many great people. So Clare McKenna was a bodybuilder, like the big proper get into the bikini with the big huge poses and everything. She's just a very overachieving kind of person. She was a top gymnast. Then she got really into the gym. Then they were like, why don't you go for these competitions? Then she got to the top of her game in that. Then she really sort of fell apart. And I've seen this with a lot of people that kind of speak to the media that have been in that world. Obviously, if you're getting to that look, that body dysmorphia can really come in, and you find it really difficult to get back to a normal way of eating or a normal way of looking. So she was really struggling with all of that. And she went off to India and she did 900 hours of yoga instructing. So she really interested me because she had that kind of grit and determination of the gym and the zen of the yoga. And she was setting up this organization with another bodybuilder that she had met, and they were fixing people's emotional issues with food in online courses. So I also worked with her and a number of other people, and I just got into the more nuances and the emotional reasons behind why we do what we do, and that there isn't that simple a fix necessarily. So it was a big eye-opener for me. And this was all, by the way, through lockdown, doing the workouts in my room and, having that time to do with it as well. So it was a big eye-opener for me.
And were you doing it for yourself, or were you doing it to track it on the show? I mean, like, were you actually taking, like, say, photographs or video as you're like progressing?
Yeah, I did it on the show, and that I was going to do it over 6 months. And I also did it in conjunction with Life magazine. I pitched it to them.
Right.
So we had a start point, a middle point, and an end point with photographs. So that was a really big deal as well, because the photographs part would be kind of triggering. I'd be like, oh my God, I'm not ready. And I'm not, so I'd be doing all this work and all this realization that it's not really about how you look, it's how you are on the inside and your relationship with yourself and your food. And yet then when the time would come to take the photos, I'd be like, oh my God, am I ready? I don't know if I am. And they were lockdown photos. It was, you couldn't go to a studio, you couldn't get your hair done, you couldn't do anything. I went to Portmarnock Beach with a guy and we were like standing miles apart from each other. And Yeah, it was a funny experience, but at the end of it, I definitely came out changed myself personally, and it was not what I had necessarily set out on the attention. My question had been like, what is health and wellness? Because when I started presenting the show, I was lost. I've always had a lean to health and wellness. My friends will tell you I'm renowned. I go nowhere without a bottle of water beside me. I was all into the green teas and the nettle tea and I'm the one who's ordering the salads and the veg and the smoothies and whatever else. So I've always been known as that kind of person. But as the years have gone on, the whole marketplace got a little bit cluttered. So when I'm going along now with my trolley, I was like throwing in paleo treats. I wouldn't have dreamed of eating like a Mars bar, but all of a sudden I'm like, it's paleo, I'm getting this. And I've come on since then. I wouldn't demonize a paleo treat or a Mars bar. Food is food now is what I'm trying to work on. But to take it back to then, I didn't know whether I should be eating meat or not eating meat. Was I supposed to be running, or was I supposed to be doing CrossFit? Was I supposed to be doing both? And it was all cluttered and messy, and it wasn't healthy. Where I was definitely not healthy. So I did need to kind of pare it back. And that was kind of my question. What is health and wellness? And that so much of it is bound up with how we look. And we're looking at images on Instagram of somebody, as particularly a woman with abs, and we're like, that's healthy and that's who I want to be. What's she eating in a day, and can I do that too? And I have really stepped away from that now, that is the wrong message, and that was certainly a part of my transformation type journey.
Yeah, amazing. Just listening to you speaking about that, like the body dysmorphia, obviously, as anyone followed my story, that's what I've been kind of talking about, lived with it for so long. And just what you were saying there, it's what I've been trying to do recently. Is so I used to work out and diet to affect how I looked. Now I do it to try and do it now to affect how I feel. So what you were saying is, I used to basically just work on the neck down. And I didn't care about the neck up, even though the neck up was like a volcano waiting to erupt. So once I started to have a healthy relationship with myself, I can have a healthy relationship with food and exercise. Because I read like the interview you did, I think it was, I don't know which one it was, Independent or something, and you were talking about having to do with the HIIT training and just, you're talking about the different foods. And it can be so overwhelming, isn't it? Especially when you go on social media or even go on YouTube and you type something in and you have all these different workouts, and he says do this and she says do that, and you wouldn't know where to start. It can be so overwhelming. Is there anything out of what you did that you'll actually stick to, or will you stick to pretty much everything from it?
I suppose it's just an overarching way of viewing health and wellness, and that will stay. What the advice that Daniel Davy had given out was to always have a balanced meal. So protein, fat, and carbohydrate in any meal. Now, I never weighed anything. He has a really good cookbook, so I'd get a few ideas from that. But it was really concentrating on making sure that I was eating a wide variety of foods and that I was enjoying my food, but that I was including things like fat. So over the years, fat was an absolute no-no, treats only. When you go out for dinner, you might order chips and then you'd berate yourself the next day for eating it. And even when I say that out loud, I'm like, how was that a normal way to live? But it becomes so ingrained in how you live. And it wasn't even that. It was more, there was one of the days that I went into one of the salad bars. And I do talk about this a lot because it was a really changing moment. And I went into one of the salad bars and I forgot about the rule, protein, fat, and carbohydrate, because you're getting your carbohydrate, which is good for your energy release. You're getting your protein, which helps you to keep fuller for longer. You're getting your fat, which is essential for all your body to work correctly. And you're getting plenty of fresh fruit and vegetables. They're the only kind of rules as such to live by. But I forgot and went back to old Clare, if you will. And I just ordered this salad, which was called winter veg. And it was basically just a few vegetables and leaves in a bowl with a bit of dressing. And I was kind of congratulating myself as this being a fantastic lunch. And that's how I would have lived. If you just had salad for lunch, you were winning, because to eat less and get smaller, that was just the key to healthy eating. So I went home. I was absolutely starving for my dinner. I ate dinner, went to bed, and it was the next morning I felt exhausted. I felt so tired. I felt headachy. I didn't feel like doing my workout. And that's when I said, that's because I didn't eat a good lunch yesterday. And that's when I made the connection. It's all connected. So, you're being told, go on juices for 3 days and you'll lose all this, and, eat less, and it'll all be much better for your waistline. But you're forgetting about your mood. You're forgetting about your energy levels. You're forgetting about your ability to exercise. So that was the biggest eye opener for me. It was how I felt, what my energy levels were, and how I felt in my head about myself. And all foods were open to me. So I would have been very strict in the kind of meals that I'd cook. Even I had to kind of relax it a bit, obviously, when I had kids, because you're making, spaghetti bolognese and cottage pie and like whatever else is going on. But back in the days when it was just me and my husband, he used to call them Clare dinners. It would be a chicken breast and a few veg, and that'd be it. And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm 6'2". He'd be like, "What is going on here?" So that was the kind of mindset that I was in. So to be on a plan, if you will, where every single food was open to me, it just turned off a kind of a voice in my head that was quite negative, that was quite self-critical, and that wasn't serving me. So I think that's something that I've really taken with me. Now, look, that's not to say I don't go back sometimes, like after Christmas. Obviously, everybody's body changes a little bit. We're, eating that little bit more. And I will start to look in the mirror or put on a dress for work that feels a bit tighter. And I will start to go, oh God, and that voice will start again. But I stop it now. I stop it now and I catch myself. So it's not like you flick this switch and you become this different person, but you do get the tools along the way to make sure you're serving yourself a little bit better.
Yeah, brilliant. I totally agree with that. Did you only do the sea swimming now? Was that still happening?
Yes, it is still happening. I mean, look, I'm not a religious get up every day and go. I might go 2 or 3 times a month. I think that's something else I kind of did. I used to be very regimental, that I need to do this at this time and this many times a week. And if I don't, I'm going to feel this particular way. Now I kind of go with the flow. If I can go, I go. If I don't, I don't. I am trying now that we're in the new year to be a bit more consistent with my gym classes or whatever else, because I think working for myself, sometimes I can just shelve a few things. Like I say, it's the spinning plate. Sometimes I just let one crash to the floor.
Yeah, I think not being so hard on yourself is
I just
quite
go
important.
with the flow. So if I can go, I go. And then I'll tick that and say, well, that was your exercise box for today. You're grand. I'm not like having this cloud hanging over me that I still need to go and run 5K because I might have eaten something at the weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't live that way anymore.
I had a nutritionist on the podcast twice, and I had Sinead from Intuitive Eating Ireland on, and they were all saying, and especially Sinead, the nutritionist, is always giving out to me for using the word exercise. She uses the word movement, and I just think I never thought about it like that before. So when you kind of take the word exercise out of the equation and you start calling it movement, you can be a lot less harder. I'm not as hard on myself anymore. So without, like we were talking about the HIIT train and stuff like that. So now, like, I posted a picture on Instagram. This is ages ago when I was doing like the housework and the hoovering, and the sweat was dripping off me, and I just posted, say, there you go, there's movement. But she was absolutely dead right, because I was having, just at the weekend gone, Saturday and Sunday, I wasn't really feeling great mentally. I was just, I don't know, just kind of comes on you. And I did some housework. I wasn't in the mood to do a workout. I still have a bit of an injured back, so I can't really do what I wanted to. So anyway, I did some housework, and again, the sweat was dripping out. Like, I did a lot, but I felt so much better after it. And I was just like, it's amazing how when you're not as hard on yourself and you give yourself a break, how easy everything kind of comes as well. You just feel
Yeah.
so much better about yourself. You know, it's
Yeah.
amazing. You
It's
know?
so important. And I kind of say that to people now. Find what's right for you. I mean, for some people, it's going to be a dance class. For some people, it's going to be a walk. For some people,
Yeah,
it's going to be a gym class. For some people, it's going to be yoga.
yeah,
Like, we don't all have to do the same thing because we're all at different stages. We all have different personalities. But to just focus on moving your body, and again, it's for your mental health.
yeah,
You know, you're doing it for your head, you're doing
yeah.
it to feel better. And I had Sabina Brennan on recently, the neuroscientist,
Mm.
and I love her because she gets so excited about the brain and how it works, and she really describes it in easy to understand
Yeah.
language. And she was talking about what happens when we exercise, and she was saying, you know, we really, not only are the endorphins and the dopamines and all that sort of stuff, and it helps us with our left brain thinking, especially when you're out walking or hiking in nature. And there's a lot to say that the more time we spend in nature, the more connected we feel to it, which ultimately is going to be better for the planet. So there's all that kind of stuff. But she was talking about strengthening certain pathways within our brain, and one of them, I'm not obviously going to remember the names. The one of them is the vagus nerve, because I never forget that one, and that's the one that you activate when you deep breathe 3 times. That's the one that sends the message to say, look, there's actually not a saber-toothed tiger here, you're going to be okay. And that gets
Okay.
activated when
Right.
you're walking. But the one that really blew my mind was, there's an area of your brain that looks after your emotional responses. So when you're moving your body on a regular, consistent basis, you strengthen that, which means you don't lean as heavily on comfort foods or emotional eating, because you've strengthened that part of your brain. So that really blew my mind, because, you know, when you are consistent with whatever your chosen exercise is, and you
Yeah.
do start to lean more to healthy foods, and you start to think to yourself, God, maybe, you know, I'm just on this health kick, but there's actually a strengthening in your brain that has meant you're able to cope with situations easier than when you have an injury or something hits and you're hanging around the house. You're just constantly looking, aren't you, for something to kind of comfort you and help
You
you.
about
So
it.
it does make sense when you look at it that way.
Yeah, yeah. No, it definitely does. I mean, like, and it takes practice as well. As you said earlier, you can't just like flick a switch. But when you actually, you know, when you actually understand, you know, a little bit more about how your body and brain works, it can be helpful. Like, trust me, I struggled with, you know, I've struggled with so many things for so long. Look, we're nearly there. I know you're not feeling well, so we'll wrap this up fairly soon. Have you any thoughts on Operation Transformation, or do you want to sidestep that landmine altogether?
No, I do have thoughts on it. I know you mentioned having Sinead from Intuitive Eating Ireland on, and I also do work with a company called Spectrum, and they
Oh yeah,
do
yeah.
online health events. And I had never heard of intuitive eating before. So I'm in my 40s, and they say, we have this lady on, her name is Carla Braden. Here's a presentation she made to us. You can watch it as part of your research. So I watched that, and my mind was absolutely blown. I didn't even know about diet culture. I had heard things about, you know, try not to go for fat free because, you know, it can be full of sugar, and, you know, these brands and companies don't really care about you, they're just trying to sell. So I had that kind of concept. That's about as far as it went. I didn't really know about diet culture and this focus on a smaller body being a better body, and particularly as a woman. And I think it's incredible that you and people like you are starting to speak out, that it's not just a female issue, but this idea, this patriarchal idea that women should be smaller. And the more time we're spending focusing on how we look and putting ourselves down, what could we do with the brain space that we free up in that time? So this was a real sit up moment for me. I was like, oh, Captain, my Captain, why are we doing this? And why did I not hear about this when I was a teenager? And, you know, there's a dietitian that I follow and I've had on the show a lot. I adore her, Orla Walsh. And she had posted a picture of female abdominals, and she said, this looks like health, but for a female to have abdominals, the body fat percentage has to be this percent, which will mean fertility issues may occur. And they're the kind of things that we're giving up. Like, they're the kind of things just to fit into a certain outfit or look a certain way. And there's plenty of people who are healthy who do look that way. There's not one ideal body shape. And I think that's what we're really trying to get out there a little bit. But that really made me open my eyes. And when I was getting married, I was probably the most focused I've ever been on eating and working out, because I had that end goal. And I was working out with a trainer who I'd met through work. And to be fair to him, he was coming on the show, so he was sort of training me for free. So I used to kind of go along. He'd be training somebody else. He'd tell me what to do. He'd show me how to do the exercises, and then I'd head off. So probably the eating side of things, maybe he would have been a bit more involved in, but I was eating like a chicken breast and 9 nuts for breakfast. And if I slipped over into 10 or 11 nuts, I'd be like berating myself. So, I mean, it was to that level. And I went consistently 4 times a week. I've never felt fitter, stronger. I used to look in the mirror and there were no issues, but I didn't comfortably go out for dinner with my friends or my family. I didn't drink. I didn't have a cheat day. I just stayed on this rigid plan. And I wasn't getting my monthly cycle. And I was 30, so I wasn't, and we were waiting until we were a couple of years married before we were even thinking about children. So it wasn't on my top priority list. And I was like, oh, I'm just an irregular kind of person. I didn't really think about what I was doing to my body. And at the risk of giving too much information, I was also, my digestive system was all over the place because it wasn't getting the fiber it needed. It wasn't getting the vegetables it was needed. So you see this gorgeous photograph, but at what cost does it come? So all of that began to knit itself together in my mind and really make me think again and think passionately about speaking up against diet culture and health at every size, and focusing on fixing people's relationships with themselves and food first before we go any further. And I'm not interested in demonizing a program or the people involved. I think with Operation Transformation, they've come such a long way. And sometimes you have to meet people where they're at. I watched an episode. It wouldn't be my cup of tea now to sit and watch it, but the humiliation end of things is gone. There is a holistic look at health. There's a psychologist there. There's a GP there. They were looking at all different elements of this gorgeous guy's life. And he was cooking more meals from scratch with his husband at home. He was discussing his social anxiety with a psychologist. He was giving up smoking. So it wasn't all just focused on weight, but it is a plan that's going up for the country to follow. It is everywhere, in supermarkets, community centres. And I'm not saying that the intention isn't good. I'm just saying that the conversation needs to change, because you have to think about people like yourself who are really triggered by this, who go straight back, those at either ends of the spectrum of eating disorders, but also the middle lane people like me that have this messaging that to be in a smaller body is a better body, to restrict your eating is the only way forward. I think we just need to move it on a little bit and not only focus on the transformation from the inside out and not include the weight at all.
Exactly. I was just going to, what you said at the beginning, I'm 42 in October, and I'd only heard of, I've only heard of intuitive eating last year. So there you go. I've never heard of it before. I actually have Jo Mascali on the podcast next week. I recorded it already, and she is the other person who has actually set up the petition with Sinead for Operation Transformation. So I told her I'd stick that in the description of her episode. So anyway, right, we're nearly there. Is there anything that you want to mention before we go? Anything that you want to plug?
I put up on my social media about this kind of Operation Transformation discussion. And something else I'll say is, apart from my own experience, like I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and my son is, mad into sports. He is like, he doesn't put on any weight. He eats whatever comes his way. And that's just how he's built. And my daughter eats the same way. She might not love sport as much as he does, but she's involved in the GAA. She's got her dancing. She's got all these things, the swimming, the exact same. They exercise the same. And she, over the last couple of years, I've noticed, has a tendency to put on weight. So I started to find I had bias against that. I started to find that I was looking at this from a health perspective. As a parent, it is the right thing to do to kind of assess, are we all getting out for enough movement? What have we been eating? Whatever. But I know I'm on that already. So I just know that she may have a metabolism that leads towards this. And obviously I'll keep an eye on it. But I noticed that bias in myself, and I noticed what that was bringing up. And I want to do better in this world for her so that it's not going to be something that holds her back. And I put up something on my social media about Operation Transformation. And it is a dream of mine to present or be involved in a program that only deals with holistic health, that looks at our self-limiting beliefs, that looks at our mindset, that introduces us to getting out in nature and moving our body, that all the things that we've spoken about all get encompassed with some of the incredible guests I've had on my show that would be alongside us as mentors. So that would be a big dream of mine. And I'm knocking on doors about that at the moment. But I put up a post to say I was going to be talking about the Operation Transformation petition on my show. And for the record, this is how I feel. I kind of said what I've just said to you there now.
Yeah.
And that I'd like to be involved in a holistic show. And it's funny, somebody commented underneath, like, it's simple, eat less, move more. And we don't need any of that holistic BS either. And it kind of, it made me laugh, not in a patronizing way. It was kind of funny the way it was written. And I know that there's that real school of thought as well. And I think that health and wellness, because it has gone a bit bonkers with the amount of money that's been pumped into it. And, everybody from Gwyneth Paltrow to you name it is saying what you should and shouldn't be doing. And I know it can get confusing and seem like it's BS, but actually it's very simple. And it's about us trying to make people feel like they are worthy and silence that inner critic and make them feel like they're not trying to fit this ideal. And if we could break down all of those barriers, I think we'd have a much healthier society.
About it. And you actually had Joe on that episode on your show, didn't you?
Yeah. So we had her and Professor Donal O'Shea, who's the HSE lead on obesity. And so, he's the same. He's like, it's not as simple as eat less, move more. There are so many nuances as to why somebody is going to gain weight, including their genetics, including hormones, including their life experiences so far, including their lifestyles right now. And I think the more we start to talk about that, the better. And that's not to say Operation Transformation aren't starting that discussion. I just think we need to move the conversation on a little bit.
Exactly. And I was actually chatting to Joe about the genetics part of it, and just going back to what you were saying about your case, mine are exactly the same. They've got the same body shape. Well, two of them have the same body shape that I had when I was younger. One of them doesn't. It's just it's just their body shape. It's genetics. And I'll tell you something that I actually haven't said to anyone. Was it last week? It was last Saturday. We went to collect my son from badminton. He plays every Saturday morning. And we went into the hall and he was wearing a hoodie and he was sweating. And we're like, Aaron, take off your hoodie if you're roasting. No, I don't want to take my hoodie off. My t-shirt is too tight underneath. And I'm like, oh my God, he's 10. And he's thinking of this now. You know, that's the body dysmorphia is starting to kick in already.
Yeah. And I've had, my daughter was at a playground one day, those sort of in our playground anyway, they're bugs, they're little like ladybirds, and there's four and they kind of bounce. And she sat on it with 3 other girls. And one of the girls said, oh my God, somebody here is really heavy and they're really pushing the whole thing down. So it gets said again and again, but I just constantly say, I don't allow any negative body talk about any body shape in the house. If I hear it, I call it out and I say, people come in all different shapes and sizes. And, you know, we're staying with my mom at the minute. And obviously my mom comes from a different time, and she was here with her sister, and they were kind of slagging each other about having put on weight and, you know, who's more fat. And my daughter said, Granny, people come in all different shapes and sizes. We don't say that. So I'm just hoping the more I hammer that home, and myself, my husband would never say, oh no, I've put on weight, or I've this or I've that. We just don't talk about that as a negative or a positive thing, but they're going to come up against it. You know, they really are, because that's just the world we live in. But I'm really passionate about trying to be part of changing that conversation, as I know you are too, for our kids, because we know what that was like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're exactly the same. And people have asked me that quite a few times because of, you know, how open I am about it. Does it affect the way I parent? And yes, of course it does now. Yeah, exactly. And I gave a talk to the students at UCC, a webinar just before Christmas, and it was all about body image and social media. And then we were just kind of talking about that. Like, I was lucky. I mean, you and me are kind of the same age, and can you imagine what it would have been like with social media when we were in school? You know, I kind of fear for kids now with social media, like you mentioned it with Instagram a while ago. It's hard for them to get away from things, isn't it, when it's in their face all the time?
I do think, though, the conversation is changing. Like, I do think the teenagers and that sort of generation into 20s, I don't want to say the young people of today, because I mean, that just ages me terribly, but they are far more open about everything from gender to sexuality to body image. Inclusion is huge. And even we were talking about the reassessment that we've had in our own lives since the lockdowns. But even the world slowing down like that, we had things like the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the reaction to the Aisling Murphy murder. People are standing up now and speaking out. And, you know, on my social media, I'm very careful about who I follow. If I'm going to follow somebody who just happens to have a different body shape to mine that I might aspire to, and it's making me feel bad, they have to go. And that's not their fault. That's me setting up my own boundaries. But there are so many different body shapes out there. And I love people like Celeste Barber. She's an Australian comic, and she will take some of the videos that are out there of people like, oh, I don't know, Kendall Jenner or Gigi Hadid, who put up these TikTok videos of just themselves and the incredible bodies they were born into, doing various things. And then she does a normal body at home trying to do the same thing, and she's like falling off the bed, and the bikini's like riding up, and, you know, she makes humor out of it. And I think it's much better that that's out there, because when I was a teenager, it was just kind of, these people just had these perfect bodies. It wasn't explained. All the magazines were showing cellulite and fat and this being a really bad thing. And then having all of these people going, look what I did. I've lost all this weight in 3 weeks' time. And that was what was sold. And we've stopped doing that. We're a lot more open. We're a lot more honest. And I used to spend my time comparing myself to literally every woman I would walk past and measuring myself up against her. And if I perceived that my body was better than hers, I'd get maybe a dopamine hit or feel better. But if I felt intimidated by her, it would really weigh down on me. And that was just a normal response I had based on the messaging I was being given. So it's about getting rid of all that. And I think we talk now, you know, thanks even to people like yourself that talk about mental health and self-limiting beliefs and resilience and coping tools and mechanisms, and that we're not all skipping along the whole time feeling great. We have our ups, we have our downs, but we have things that we can lean on to help us. None of that was there before. So hopefully that's what will help our kids too.
Exactly. And one of the questions before we wrap this up, one of the questions that I just, when I mentioned the webinar I did for the students in Cork, that was pretty much the first question that got asked me, was about how can you make your social media channels work for you? And my answer was exactly what you said. Get rid of the stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable. Your social media channels, make them work for you. there's filters, there's mute buttons, there's all these type of things, and you can, when I go through my social media, it's exactly the same as you. If there's anything on there that I don't want to see, or just making me feel uncomfortable, or isn't impacting me in a negative way, it's gone.
Yeah,
because
it is dangerous though, isn't it?
Yeah.
The more I'm on social media, the more, even though I have a really curated feed of things that are good for me, there's still, because it's a showing off site, isn't it? So like, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and look at us on this walk, and look at us eating this meal. Like, it is a show off kind of setup, and I buy into it myself. But you start to compare yourself no matter what. So yeah, I'd limit the time in there as well, as much as you can.
Yeah. Right, we'll wrap this up. Do you want to give your socials a plug while we're talking about them?
I sometimes wonder, should I change my socials? I had this idea I was going to call everything Clare's Lair, but I spelled Clare without an I, and Lair has an I, and nobody really writes the word Lair except if they're in like Thundercats or something, and they're like long gone. So
Thundercats, I used to love Thundercats.
Me too.
My favorite cartoon ever.
I'm at Clare's Lair on Instagram. So yeah, give us a follow, and hopefully I won't make you feel bad about yourself. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I talk a lot because I talk for a living, but it's also something I feel really, really passionately about. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh geez, no, I appreciate you like giving up your time to come on for a chat, especially when you're not feeling well as well. So thank you. And look, the more you talk, the less I have to do. So you make my job easier, yourself.
Yeah. Well, look, you'll have to come on my radio show and tell your story, because it is really important. The more we talk about this, and that it's okay. And the more we feel that other people are like, yeah, I felt that way too, the more we feel like we're part of a community and not outsiders. So
yeah, exactly. And that's one of the topics we didn't even get to, was the stigma. Well, I suppose we did a little bit, and especially for men. But look, we'll do a part 2 of this at some stage, and we'll do a deep dive into all of that stuff.
Great, anytime.
Brilliant. Okay. All right, guys, we're going to wrap that up. Again, thanks very much, Claire, for coming on. I really appreciate you giving up your time. Right, we'll see you all very soon, guys, and I'll be back again next week with another episode of the Endless Spiral podcast. Bye for now.